The night shift droned in fluorescent hums and soft keyboard clacks when the call light blinked red. Claire pressed her headset, her voice steady from years of routine calm. 911, what's your emergency? Silence. Then a whisper, barely air, yet trembling with terror. He's wearing Dad's face. The words came in fragments, each syllable splintered by the static between breaths. Claire leaned closer to the monitor, the pulse of the line flickering as if alive. She asked the child's name, but only the wet sound of tears filled the silence. Then, faintly, something scraped across the receiver. Slow, dragging, deliberate. Claire froze as a low groan rose through the headset. Not human, but trying to be. The line erupted in distortion. A short, shrill whine, and then nothing but the hollow pulse of the call still connected. The line stayed open for 37 seconds after the voice vanished. Claire replayed it once, twice, then again, convinced she'd imagined the words. Her headset hissed with low static, and somewhere beneath it, something rhythmic pulsed, almost like breathing. She marked the call code, logging the number, but the screen flickered, and the entry blinked out before her eyes. For a long moment, she stared at the blank field where the data had been. Then her monitor refreshed. Timestamp gone. File name replaced with a single word. Deleted. The room around her seemed to stretch, the familiar hum thinning into something uneasy. Claire took off her headset and listened, but the breathing hadn't stopped. Claire called over to her coworker, but the only response was the gentle tap of distant keys. She rose, the sound of her chair wheels squealing across the linoleum, cutting through the quiet. The dispatch center felt wrong now, stretched somehow like the distance between desks had grown. Her supervisor's door was closed, a faint sliver of light leaking through the bottom. She hesitated before knocking, her hand hovering. From within came a single thump, followed by the sound of a recording rewinding. The air thickened, humming faintly with residual feedback. She backed away, uneasy, and returned to her desk. The line from the vanished call still blinked on her screen, but the timer now read 000. When her shift ended, Claire couldn't shake the voice. She drove home through sheets of cold rain, wipers beating a steady rhythm. The words repeated in her head, looping like a song she wished she could forget. At a red light, her radio crackled. For a second, she swore she heard a whisper through the static. "Can you hear me?" She switched the radio off. The silence that followed was heavier. A car horn startled her, and she realized the light had turned green. She pressed the gas, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. For just a breath, she thought she saw a small, pale face in the back seat, mouth moving soundlessly. When she looked again, the seat was empty. Later that night, Claire sat at her kitchen table, laptop open to the dispatch logs. Every trace of the call was gone. No record, no audio, not even a timestamp. She checked the backup directory. All entries for that hour had been wiped. As she leaned back, her phone lit up. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. The line was empty except for a faint hum, the kind that sinks into the walls. After several seconds, a soft voice whispered, "You heard him too." The line cut. Claire sat frozen, the glow of her screen flickering like candlelight across her face. In the reflection of her window, a shadow shifted behind her. Claire arrived early the next morning, unable to sleep. The dispatch center smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ozone, the aftertaste of machinery overworked. Her login credentials refused to load the prior night's files, displaying an error code she'd never seen. When she called it, they claimed no calls had been logged past midnight. Her stomach tightened. She leaned closer to her monitor, scrolling through blank hours of silence, until she noticed something buried deep within the directory. A folder labeled only by her own employee ID. Inside, one corrupted file blinked red. She double-clicked. The screen went black for a full 5 seconds, and then audio began to play. A faint whisper, childlike, repeating her name again and again. Her supervisor, Daniels, emerged from his office with a coffee cup and a paper smile. When Claire asked about the deleted recording, his expression faltered just long enough for her to notice. He brushed it off, said she'd probably logged it wrong, that the system auto-clears corrupted entries. But his tone didn't match the words. Later, when he thought she wasn't looking, he slipped a small flash drive into his pocket. Claire caught the reflection in the office window, his fingers trembling slightly. She wondered if he'd heard the same whisper she had. When he met her eyes again, his forced calm had cracked into something else. Fear. At lunch, Claire sat in her car, replaying the audio she'd salvaged from her own system cache. The child's whisper was faint, distorted by static, but beneath it, she heard something else. A wet rustling sound, like fabric sliding over flesh. She boosted the gain. The background hiss rose into a low growl. Then came her own voice, calm and professional, asking questions she didn't remember speaking. She turned off the playback, heart pounding. When she glanced up, she saw her reflection in the rearview mirror, lips moving silently. She wasn't speaking, but her reflection was whispering something anyway. That evening, the detective assigned to the missing child case stopped by. Detective Aisha Lorne introduced herself briskly, voice firm, pen tapping her notepad. She'd traced the number from the call to a suburban home. No signs of life. The father was found dead in the living room, cause pending autopsy. The child, Ethan, was still missing. Lorne asked Claire if she'd heard anything unusual during the call. Claire hesitated, the words sticking to her throat. He said someone was wearing his father's face. Lorne stopped writing. The clock ticked once loudly before the detective leaned forward. You're sure that's what he said? Claire nodded. Neither woman spoke again for a long while. Later that night, long after her shift, Claire returned to her desk. The building was nearly dark. She logged into the restricted server with credentials she wasn't supposed to have, bypassing security warnings. Hidden between archived emergency calls was one new entry, time-stamped for tomorrow. Its file name read simply, Call, Ethan Brooks. Her fingers hovered over the play icon, pulse echoing in her ears. The room seemed to breathe around her. She pressed play. A child's whisper filled her headset again. He's still here. The lights above her flickered once and went out completely. Only the red call light remained, blinking steadily in the dark. Oh! Detective Aisha Lorne parked at the curb of the address traced from the 911 call. The house sat in silence, half swallowed by overgrown hedges and rain-matted grass. Curtains hung crooked in the front windows, one torn as if by a struggling hand. The air smelled of rot and wet leaves. She adjusted her coat collar and stepped through the squealing gate. Each step up the path sank slightly into the mud, soft and reluctant. When she reached the porch, the wind died completely. Her gloved hand hovered over the doorknob, the metal slick with something that wasn't rain. She pressed it open, slow enough to feel the weight of air change inside, thick and stale, like a breath that had been held too long. Inside, the house felt wrong, soundless except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere deeper in the dark. Dust hung heavy in the beam of her flashlight. Family photos lined the hallway. A smiling man, a woman, and a child, Ethan. Each frame had been turned face down, all except one. The last photo showed Ethan on his father's shoulders, but someone had scratched deep lines over the father's face, tearing through the print until only the boy's image remained. As she moved forward, her boot touched something slick. She knelt, shining her light, a smear of blood leading toward the living room. The pattern wasn't a spill, it was a trail as though something had been dragged there. The living room reeked of copper and mildew. Aisha stepped over a shattered coffee table, her light catching a shape slumped against the far wall. The father, or what remained of him, sat upright, head tilted at an impossible angle. His eyes were open, glassy, staring at nothing. His face, however, was gone, peeled away in a clean, surgical absence. Blood soaked into the carpet beneath him in concentric patterns, as if deliberately arranged. Near his hand lay a child's shoe, smeared with something dark. Aisha's throat tight. On the wall above him, written in streaks of rust and flesh, were 4 words. "He wears us now." A sound came from upstairs. Faint, like a foot dragging over carpet. Aisha froze, heart thudding hard enough to feel in her throat. She whispered for backup into her radio, but the signal crackled and died. Slowly, she climbed the stairs, each step groaning under her boots. At the top, a door stood slightly ajar, a thin stripe of light flickering from within. Children's drawings covered the hallway wall, crayon colors bleeding and warped by moisture. Most showed a smiling man holding a child's hand, but in each, the man's face was blank, shaded over in black. As she neared the open door, she heard a whisper, soft, trembling, familiar. "Don't let him find you." The bedroom smelled of metal and wet earth. Toys were scattered across the floor, bed sheets tangled. In the center of the room sat a small tape recorder, its red light blinking. Aisha crouched and pressed play. Static hissed, then a whisper. Ethan's voice. He said, "I could wear faces too." The tape sputtered, rewound itself, and replayed the same line. Slower this time, the tone changing with each repetition until it no longer sounded like a child. A sudden creak came from the closet behind her. She turned, flashlight beam shaking. The door was slightly open. From the darkness inside, a soft, wet laugh escaped, followed by the sound of something breathing through another's mouth. Claire hadn't been to the dispatch center in 2 days, but the sounds hadn't left her. Every time she tried to sleep, her phone hummed once, never twice, and a faint breath whispered through the line when she answered. That evening, she sat on her couch, surrounded by old headset logs, printed transcripts, and cold coffee. One of the transcripts contained a line she'd never written. "He's behind you now." She stared at it for long minutes, tracing the words with her thumb. Her living room felt smaller, darker. The air vents sighed softly, and her own reflection in the black TV screen seemed a second late to move. She whispered, "Ethan." The lights dimmed a fraction, like something exhaled through the walls. When she returned to work, the office felt abandoned, though every desk was occupied. People spoke quietly, avoiding her eyes. Claire powered on her terminal, and the system booted with a sound she didn't recognize. A low, wet hum that seemed to pulse in her headset. She checked recent calls and froze. There, under her name, were dozens of identical entries labeled with tomorrow's date. Each timestamp read the same hour. 3:07 a.m. She clicked 1. The playback began with her own voice saying, 911, what's your emergency? Then silence. Then breathing. Then a whisper, not the child's, but something deeper, wearing her tone. "You answered me again." She tore off the headset and stumbled into the hallway, chest tight. The emergency exit light flickered red and white, alternating like a heartbeat. Down the corridor, she saw her supervisor, Daniels, standing motionless outside his office. She called his name. He turned slowly, eyes vacant. His headset hung around his neck, the earpiece pressed against his throat. From it came faint whispering. He lifted a trembling finger and pointed toward her desk. "It's still on," he said, but his voice wasn't his. It was hers. A perfect mimicry, word for word, tone for tone. Then his mouth stretched wider than it should, and static began to pour out like wind. Claire fled into the break room, locking the door behind her. Her pulse drummed in her ears. The vending machine lights flickered, cycling through product codes like a corrupted file. From the speaker above, faint audio leaked through. Recordings of 911 calls, layered, overlapping. Her own voice repeated lines she hadn't spoken aloud. answering questions no caller had asked. She pressed her palms over her ears, but the voices grew louder, converging into one tone that said her name. She turned toward the reflective vending glass and saw her reflection smiling back, a wide, unbroken grin spreading slowly until it split the reflection's cheeks open. She ran down corridors that seemed longer than they should be, past desks looping back on themselves. Every monitor she passed turned on, each displaying her face speaking in delay, mouths moving half a second late. She reached the main control room, the central server hub. The wall of monitors glowed in static white. Then, one by one, each screen resolved into a live feed of her own face, filmed from behind. Claire turned, but no one was there. She looked back to the screens. Behind her image now stood a small figure, Ethan, his eyes hollow, his hands slick and red. The speakers crackled. His whisper filled the room. "He says it's your turn." Claire couldn't stop seeing the boy's eyes from the screens. They followed her even in sleep, unblinking, patient. She drove through fog-thick streets toward the house that had birthed the call, headlights carving through mist like fading memories. The silence in the car felt too dense, as if the air itself listened. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel to some rhythm she didn't recognize. When she reached the address, she turned off the engine, but the car's radio hummed softly, picking up faint static that shaped itself into breathing. She opened the door, rain whispering against the roof, and whispered into the night, "I just need to see it for myself." The house waited, motionless. Inside, the air carried the stillness of a place that remembered too much. Claire's flashlight beam crawled across the living room, revealing covered furniture and dust like thin snow. The scent of damp paper and cold wood lingered. On the far wall hung a mirror, large and old, its silver surface clouded with age. She felt drawn toward it without knowing why. Her reflection looked back a moment slower than her own movement, as though waiting for permission. The floor creaked beneath her step. She whispered, "Ethan," and thought she saw a faint outline beside her reflection. A smaller shape, watching with the patience of someone who had always been there. Upstairs, the hallway was lined with drawings. Crayons had etched colors into peeling wallpaper. Simple figures of a smiling man, a woman at a desk, and a small child holding a phone. One drawing stopped her cold. It showed her own face behind a 911 headset, the child whispering into a receiver. Beneath it, in a child's handwriting, was a single word, "Listen." Claire crouched, tracing the paper's edge. The air around her seemed to hum faintly, and the paper rippled as though stirred by a breath. She turned toward the stairs, but the hallway behind her had grown longer, deeper, as if stretching away from her in silence. The mirror from downstairs appeared again. Impossible. Now hanging on the bedroom wall. Claire's reflection blinked a heartbeat too late, then smiled faintly, though her lips had not moved. She stepped closer, compelled by the stillness of her own eyes looking back. The reflection whispered something inaudible, and condensation bloomed across the glass as if it had breathed. She raised her hand. The reflection's fingers met hers, but felt warmer, almost alive. The lights flickered once, and when they steadied, the reflection was alone. Claire turned, searching the dim corners of the room. The space behind her was empty, yet she could feel someone standing just out of sight, breathing quietly through her own rhythm. Outside, dawn began to pale the sky, but inside the house the light refused to change. Claire sat in front of the mirror, the flashlight long since faded. The reflection watched her steadily. She spoke to it softly. Questions, apologies, confessions she didn't remember meaning to say. Her reflection mouthed the same words, but with a slight smile, comforting, almost human. From somewhere unseen, a soft child's voice whispered, "Now you hear us." The reflection's smile widened, gentle and tired, as if grateful. Claire blinked, and for the briefest instant, her reflection moved first, leaning forward until their foreheads nearly touched, the glass trembling between two identical breaths. The storm outside pressed against Claire's apartment windows like a restless tide. The power flickered, leaving her laptop's glow as the only light in the room. The file she'd discovered, one she didn't remember saving, sat at the center of her desktop, labeled Echo Log 6A. She hovered the cursor above it, heartbeat pacing the seconds. When she opened the file, a grainy waveform appeared, looping infinitely. The audio began to play without her touching anything. A voice came through, her own, soft, measured, familiar. "Do you still hear him?" it asked. Claire froze. The file continued, her voice answering itself in a lower, rasping tone. "Always." She replayed the file, trying to locate its origin in the logs, but the metadata was wrong. The creation date marked 1 year from now. The playback began again, looping, each repetition slightly slower, her voice stretching like elastic. In the background of the recording, faintly, she heard typing. She turned toward her desk. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving, yet the keys pressed themselves one by one, echoing perfectly in sync with the sound inside the recording. Claire backed away, breath shallow. The screen text began to write itself. "I'm still on the line." At the dispatch center the next morning, Claire entered before sunrise. The hallways felt longer again, as though the building stretched between each heartbeat. She logged into her console. Every saved call displayed the same length. 3, 7. She pressed play on one at random. Static filled the air, followed by faint murmurs of operators answering emergencies. But layered beneath it, almost imperceptible, was a soft humming. Her own. Each file carried it, woven through every second. Her hands shook as she removed the headset. Yet, even without it, the hum continued, faint and constant, not through her ears but somewhere deeper, like memory replaying itself. Detective Lorne visited that afternoon, raincoat still wet, eyes questioning. Claire showed her the files, the repeated timestamps, the audio that mimicked her voice. Lorne listened with her brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. "These aren't echoes," she said quietly, removing the headset. "They're transmissions." Claire frowned. "From where?" The detective didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward the monitor, where the waveform still pulsed faintly, even though playback had stopped. The pattern resembled a heartbeat. Slowly, the cursor began to move on its own, typing 3 words into the blank log. "You forgot me." That night, Claire played the file one last time. The waveform pulsed steadily, now slower, rhythmic, like breathing. She leaned close, whispering, "Ethan?" Silence. Then a faint reply, layered over static. "We found another operator." The waveform spiked briefly, then flattened. Her speakers popped once, sharp as a gunshot, before fading to absolute silence. In the dark reflection of her monitor, her own image lingered a moment too long after she moved, lips curling into a tired half-smile. The cursor blinked on the empty screen, waiting. Then, with no input, her system began to record again. The dispatch center was nearly empty when Claire returned for her final shift. The hallway lights hummed faintly, each bulb flickering as she passed. She carried no bag, only her ID badge and a small recorder in her coat pocket. Her station looked untouched, the headset resting exactly where she'd left it. She sat down slowly, breathing with the rhythm of the computer's waking. The room seemed to recognize her, monitors blinking alive in quiet sequence. She whispered, "I'm here now." The headset clicked once, though she hadn't pressed a button. Then a voice, soft, familiar, and impossibly near, answered, "So am I." When she placed the headset on, the static that filled her ears was not random. It breathed. Each rush of noise aligned with the rise and fall of something listened. She closed her eyes and asked the silence, "What do you want?" No words came back, only the sound of slow inhalation as though the room itself considered her question. Then, faintly, another breath joined hers, timed perfectly, echoing every exhale. She opened her eyes to find every monitor displaying her own face, caught mid-breath, each reflection slightly delayed, like a rehearsal of her life looping a few seconds behind. Detective Lorne arrived quietly, stepping into the dispatch room with a thermos in hand. She hesitated when she saw the monitors, each displaying Claire, each slightly out of sync. "Claire?" she asked softly. "Claire didn't turn." "He's still calling," she whispered. The detective watched the red record light blink on. Across every screen, Claire's image began to speak, though her real lips stayed still. The recorded versions murmured the same sentence in 100 layered echoes. "You can't hang up now." The air trembled, and the hum of the servers deepened, like a held note stretching forever. The power flickered. For an instant, the monitors went dark, and both women were reflected in the blank glass. Their reflections stood perfectly still even after they moved. Lorne reached forward, touching the screen, and felt warmth beneath her fingertips, as if someone pressed back from inside. Claire whispered, "It doesn't stop listening." Then the lights returned, and only her workstation was powered. The other screens remained black, reflecting both women's faces, until a third reflection appeared between them, faint, smaller, and watching with quiet patience. Dawn spilled across the windows, but inside the dispatch center the light never reached. Lorne turned to speak, yet Claire's chair sat empty. Only the headset remained, the microphone light steady. The monitors flickered once more and stabilized on a single image. Claire sitting at her desk, calm, smiling faintly, listening. From the speakers came a small voice, neither child nor adult, whispering through static. "We're all still connected." The detective removed her badge radio, but the whisper followed through its speaker, gentle and persistent. She looked toward the glass partition. In the reflection, Claire still sat there, waiting for the next call.